As you move through Lightwave and Modeler, every once in a while you're going to need to get into the preferences and the options. So let's open up Lightwave Layout and press the D key for display. And when you do that, the Preferences panel comes up. And this was introduced a number of years ago. Used to be where there was two different panels. Now there's just one big panel, which is terrific. Let's work our way through quickly. I just want to give you an overview of all of this. The General tab within the Preferences, and again, you can get here by pressing D on your keyboard. Another way to get to this panel is go to the Edit drop-down menu, and you can see here's General Options. It's checked because that's the one we're in now. Display, OpenGL, and so on. So you can always get to it that way. I generally don't. I always just press the D key and click around, but either way. So we have our input device. It's set to a mouse. If you have a tablet, like a Wacom tablet, you can use that. Your file dialog. Now, this is when you open or close something. So it's set to default, but there is one called VB File Requester. It's been there forever. And I don't really use it, but let's just say we did a load scene. Notice that when we do, we get a nice Lightwave looking dialog. If we go to save scene as, we get a Lightwave looking one where we can choose and show icons and all kinds of things. The typical way, if it was default, would be your Windows or Mac system. And then let's do it again. File, save scene, and you get kind of the default system one. So same goes for color picker. You have your default system, Windows or Mac color system, or you do a Lightwave color picker so that when you're in, let's say, the surface editor, or perhaps in a backdrop items where we want to, backdrop options, and you want to click on a color, you get this nice Windows one. And frankly, we should keep this on because this is a lot more advanced than the simple Macintosh or Windows one, because you have a quick color value, which of course you can set right here, hue, saturation, and value, and red, green, and blue. But then you can reverse to one of these, which is a really nice way to go. You can do a tint and shade. You can do a wavelength, which is often very cool, and Kelvin. So for instance, in our photography studio, I often shoot about 4800 Kelvin. And I get a very nice warm light. See that right there? Because I know that Kelvin temperature. You can bring it down to, let's say, like, 1800 and shoot really, really warm. Or you can go maybe like to 6000 and shoot it much cooler, or you can just click and drag and see what that is. Okay, but generally everything's going to concentrate all right within these values here. But a great way to work. And again, that's the color picker based on Lightwave or default. Color format, integer, floating, or percentage. We're going to do integer. If you do a floating color or percentage, you could change how the color format looks in your final render. So you need to kind of check with wherever you're going, whether it's going to print or video. But you also don't necessarily need to worry about that as much either if you're staying within the computer yourself. Just leave it at default. I just did a quick F9 render to call up the render panel. And in here we have a save RGB as linear, sRGB, the 709, Cineon, and a few others. You can also change your alpha channel to sRGB, as well as some of these is here, and of course that's the size. So I've gone back and forth between linear and RGB between most renders. Don't really use the other ones. If you're going to film, I know that some of the film guys I know often use Cineon. So that is there if you need it, depending on where your final file is going or what's coming in as well. So just keep an eye on that depending on who you're working with. Auto key create. Now we talked about this earlier, and it is the auto key create down here, and it's set to all channels by default, and it's checked on. And that's really nice because it's right there on your interface. Well, this guy right here is kind of a base for it. You can actually turn it off entirely, or motion channels, or just existing. So we're going to keep that default to modified channels. Parent in place is on, but it's also right here on the layout interface. And when we get to setting up more hierarchies, we may or may not use this. And what this means is, let's say you want to parent something, and let me just close these. I'm moving the camera, right? And I want the light to follow. So I'll select the light. I can press M for motion options. Parent this to the camera. Notice that when I did, the light stayed in place. And when I move this, the light goes with. It stayed in place because I have parent in place on. So when you parent something, the item stays in place. So let me unparent it, turn this off, and let's see what happens. Probably might not make much of a difference here. It did move, but where this would be a bigger deal is, let's say you built something in Modeler all around this 0, 0 axis, and then you got to layout, You put something together, you move parts, you got this whole thing set up, and then you figure out, oh, I need to parent. And as soon as you parent, all of your items jump. Well, that's where parent in place comes in. Okay, so if you're parenting something and it moves around, turn that on. If you're parenting something and it doesn't move like you think it should, turn that off. Simple enough. All right, so back to the general tab. All right, a few other things. Frames per second. If you're running for a video, 30, or you can do a little bit more accurate, 2997. Again, be conscious of where your final render or animation is going. If it's going to an editor, see what he needs or she. If you need 30 frames or 2997, there's not a whole lot of difference except that it's been said editing over time slips a little bit, so this 2997 is supposed to be a little bit more accurate. Your time code you can set. Fractional frames you can add, and you can actually see them down in the timeline. Show keys and slider, you definitely want that on to show your keyframes, unless you've got motion capture and something that's just intense with a huge amount of keyframes. And if you motion capture, you would see that. You might want to turn those off. All right, auto key management, we're going to keep that off. We don't need the computer doing anything more for us for auto key. We have our base auto key right here. You can have unlimited undos, but you'll also get a little warning. This option can eventually exhaust all of your available memory, resulting in instability. So kind of keep that in mind. Let's keep undo levels at 40. Save options, advanced, disabled, or simple. And autosave, never. Autosave scene, never. It's there if you want it. I really don't. There's a lot of times you may actually, let's say you accidentally move something. The phone rings. You need to go get the phone. Oh, autosave kicked in. Oh, your system crashed. Guess what? Well, now you don't have what you're working on. So I think it's a little bit better to manually know, hey, I'm done. I want to save. I made a change. I want to save, and so on. But totally up to you. All right, graph editor audio shows in there. Thumbnail reviews. Clear scene to default if you want when you quit. So a few other things. Enable master auto load. Those are all things you should leave on by default. Kind of the auto scan plugins as well, so that everything loads up properly. Everything loads back to the default basis where we want it. Okay, so a lot of times if you're not sure what some of these do, just leave them alone. Display options. Viewport layouts. In one of the videos I talk about how the different views can look like modeler or anything else as you want. Set as default, for instance. If you want that as a default, you click on the button. So when you load back up, that will be your default. And you can unlock preview window, use the camera resolution for the preview window as well. So all kinds of things you can do when it comes to doing that. I'm going to keep those at default. Preview scale depth, anti-alias, that's always good. Or you can do every 4th or 8th pixel. But our system's not slowing down, so let's keep that as anti-aliased. Now the alert level. Earlier, just a second ago, I showed you that a yellow warning came up down here at the bottom. That's my alert level. So depending on what tool and what alert needs to be told, I can set this value. I can set it to low, which means if I get a warning on some things, set it to low, I'm going to get very few warnings. Means, hey, I know what I'm doing, it's okay, keep going. If you're very new, maybe you want it at high, so that every little thing that might possibly cause an issue, it'll alert you. We're going to keep this at medium where default is. Toolbar position left or right. You can hide the toolbar altogether, and you can customize the interface. A lot of people don't know this is here. This used to be part of the hub, but it's actually in the display now. So your state buttons, you can change your action buttons, your dialogue buttons, and so on. You can actually even put a background image in these little gray areas, and you can background splash. Let's just load up our reflection map. And then if I hit OK, go to Lightwave and we quit. And we just exit. And let's restart. We should see that all right in the interface. Awesome. I don't know if that's something you want to do, but it's there if you can. It could be kind of neat. Might not be a bad idea if a client's coming in and you want to put their logo in there. Kind of a neat idea. And you notice that it tiles all over. So the only hard part is actually finding out where the button is again, because I did so much. Hit default scheme within there. Kind of like that. Hit OK. Quit. And start up again. We're back to normal. No, I have to get that out of there. I forgot to clear the image. Okay. That's really annoying. There we go. All right, so let's jump through the rest of these. Camera view tab down here. Different things that happen in the camera view. It's kind of important if we're doing any compositing. You will see a background image or preview. You can set those so that when you're in the camera view, if you've added anything in the compositing options, such as a background image, when I get to my camera view, and if I'm in shaded solid mode, if I jump to VPR, certainly I can see that because it's rendering. But if I go to front face wireframes or anything else, I can't see anything. But I can change that and say, give me my background image. And there it is. So when the camera is there, I can actually see that image. Kind of neat. All right, composition overlay for doing any kind of composites. Flip the horizontal or vertical. Show safe areas. Kind of neat for broadcast. Some of you might not know what this is at all, but those of us that came from the broadcast days really rely on this. And essentially what this is this outer areas where your video safe is. So any element, background, some motion graphics need to stay within this frame here. Otherwise, there's a chance they'll be cut off. Even though this is the outer edge of your frame. This inner frame is your title safe. So any titles really should always remain within that safe area. Can have an aspect ratio overlay if you're doing any kind of letterboxing, OpenGL lens flares, OpenGL fog, copy to perspective view. So what these mean is if you have fog on, if you have lens flares on, you can see them in the OpenGL in your layout right there. And you can show a field chart too. Go back to the camera view. I use a field chart once in a while if you're trying to do something very accurate. Just remove the camera on, you actually can show those fields right there. Okay, composition overlay, hide set to orange. The GL view, I'm going to zip through these, just kind of overview of anything relating to the OpenGL. And let me just go to Modeler Tools, Geometry, add a sphere, click OK. And we'll go to Texture Shaded. So anything when we place textures on here, lighting, everything else, all of that, this is the OpenGL, the Open Graphics Library that is displaying this shaded object. So you want transparencies to show in OpenGL. You want reflections to show in OpenGL. You want textures to show. Those are all set right here. The resolution of the texture. Notice you can go to 16,000. That's quite high for a texture resolution. But just remember, this is your display only. This has nothing to do with your final render. So just keep that in mind. So if you got a lot of textures in your scene, jump that down to 256. If it's just one thing, maybe go to 2048, something like that. The OpenGL library only maximizes at 8 lights. So if we have 8 lights in the scene, you'll see them all. If you have 10 lights, you're only going to see the effects of 2 until those other 8 are selected. So doesn't mean it's changing the scene. It's just your display. All right, your defaults. That's what def means. Default scene length. And this is really nice. You have to go into the scene file as a text editor and change this in the past. I can set my default to 10 seconds or 300 frames. And my default resolution, let's say everything you do is 1080p, you can set that right there. Your default camera type, focal length, everything else. In order for this to save, you need to quit. So I'm going to do Command Q, exit, open up, and take a look. 300 now is my default down there. Press the D key again. Let's go to defaults. And there's my default resolution. Everything's set. So all you have to do is just set those and quit. Your paths. In one of the very first videos in this course, we talk about the content directory. Watch it, learn it, love it, know it. It's very, very important. That being said, you can actually customize if things want to go different places. This is like a general group where everything is going to go, our scenes, our images, our objects. You can use custom paths, however, if you want scenes to go maybe across the network and you want objects to stay locally and you want images to go, I don't know, up in a cloud somewhere. I don't think that would work, but perhaps on a server somewhere. And auto detect. And what this auto detect is going to do is when you load a scene from some random place, it will say, hey, you want the content directory set to this random place? You say, okay. It will auto-detect that and pull everything else in. Color space. Really nice. Added in Lightwave 10, I believe. You can set your color space to picked colors, light colors, and so on. And what's color space? Well, it's something very important because 3D people, such as the programs in NewTek, have learned that a lot of your renders, when you set them to go need to go to print, need to go to video, and that color always has to match. And for years, I actually did have a lot of issues with color with clients' logos. Even though they gave me the exact Pantone colors, we matched the RGB in Photoshop, punched it in here, the output didn't quite match where we were in the edit, and when we were editing, we had to kind of fake it a little bit. So now you can change all those colors to sRGB, 709, Cineon, and so on. OBJs. All right. OBJs are a very standard object format. Came from Wavefront, I believe. And you'll be able to pretty much get that file in and out of any 3D program. And it's kind of nice. So it's so important that NewTek put a OBJ tab in. And this just chooses if you want to merge points, pivot at the center, if you want it as one layer when it comes in, and so on. So these are import and export values for OBJ files. Lastly, the navigation. And if I plugged in, and I got to see if this works as I'm talking to you, I have a 3D connection mouse, and I'm actually going to unplug my dongle, and hope we don't crash, and plug this in and see if this shows up. It might not show up until we restart, but we'll see. Yeah, it's on, but I don't think it's catching it. All right, I'm just going to go ahead and quit and see if I can get this to show up. A 3D connection mouse is actually kind of like a joystick for your interface. Now, my dongle is off at the moment just because I needed a USB port. And I don't believe, I might not even have the driver in it. I think that's why. So, all right, well, the 3D connection mouse allows you to move through your scene. You have this device, sort of like a joystick, and you can interactively move through your scene. And it doesn't replace your regular mouse, but it's a kind of a world control. And if you're modeling, you can actually, it's almost like you're holding your model in one hand, and then you can use your mouse in the other hand. So check out 3D Connection. It's C-O-N-N-E-X, like that. Connection, I-O-N. All right, so, and that is the preferences. If you press the O for options, that also goes to preferences. And that's it. So, kind of that unnecessary stuff that we needed to get through that is actually necessary. The evil necessaries, I guess we call them. But just an overview of the preferences. And over here, while we're at the help file, if you go to contents, it loads up the Lightwave contents. Web-based help, you can enter your license key right here. Little window comes up, enter in your license, which is terrific. Very nice to do. And when you quit, everything is saved. And I'll just restart. I want to jump into Modeler real quick. Now that I have the dongle back on. And press this little guy right here. All right, now, options in here, much simpler than in layout because there's not as many things, but they work differently. Our content directory, which you've seen, polygons that we create are going to be set to quadrangles. Very, very important. It's on by default, so just leave it there. You can, if you're modeling for a specific reason, set to triangles, but in Lightwave, we like quadrangles. Points, 4 points make up the polygons. All right, your surface name, set to default. I recommend keeping this at default, simply because if you name it to, my great surface, well, when you actually create surface names, you won't realize that the default surface, the one you've not named, is actually left alone. So default's always good. It gives you an idea of a surface that you possibly have missed. We've talked about subdivisions in the course, so be sure to reference that video about subpatch and Catmull Clark. Metaballs, just forget about them. We're never going to do those. Undo levels 40. Symmetry tolerance, how accurate that is. And autosave is off. OBJs in and out, just like in layout. Color space, just like in layout. Press the D key in Modeler and we get a different panel altogether. You get the display options. And here you can actually set your polygon selection color, your edge selection color. I actually really like all these defaults, especially the green edge selection. But you can change those anytime you want. If we change our perspective view here, you can change that perspective amount. So for you CAD guys going from Pro E and things like that that want to use Lightwave, here's that perspective you look for, where you can actually see the accurate measurements. Kind of flattens everything out. For us more visual guys, we kind of like, wow, we like that way. All right, so Lightwave gives you a default somewhere kind of in the middle. And there's some presets in here as well for your views. GL, just like in Lightwave layout. Texture resolution, if we apply textures on here, how that shading's handled, if we have transparencies, if we have reflections, and that is, of course, if we're doing a shaded view. Your viewports. In your viewports here, you can have your top left, your top right, your bottom left, your bottom right, and you can choose what each one of those are. Now, we don't really do this in here simply because we have controls at the top of each viewport, but that's what these are, centralized. However, notice that when I zoom in, all 4 views zoom in. Well, you can make those independent if you want. So watch. See that? Top left was selected, I made it independent. Top right, independent. Bottom left, independent, and bottom right, independent. So now each one of these views can be controlled independently. Very nice to know that you have that control. And I don't necessarily need it in my type of work, but if you're doing architecture and you're doing some strong characters, you may actually want that. Kind of nice. And along with that, you can have independent background color. So that view could be just something else entirely. Independent centers and so on. And independent visibility. So maybe you don't want a grid. Maybe you don't want to show any selections. You know, it's all pretty much self-explanatory. Just try it out and see. Your backdrop. If you're going to load a backdrop image in to possibly trace over or use as a reference, you do it right here. So I just told it top left, load the image, play with the brightness and the contrast, and then of course change the size of it. And now that's not affecting my model anyway. It's just in the background and we can use it as a template to build over. Along with interface, you have your alert levels like we did in layout. Hide the toolbar. Viewport titles, that's those guys right up there. Customize the interface, same thing. Color pickers, same. So pretty much everything we have in layout just now in Modeler. Now you can choose things like simple wireframe points. I just selected some points and I could turn this on and then make these much bigger. You know, perhaps you have poor eyesight and you do need to see those. Perhaps you have a client that can't see them and you're over your shoulder watching. So units. This is probably one of the most important things in here. All right, we're going to do everything by default. That way there's no confusion. The unit system is set to SI, which is System International. You also have metric and English. And you can jump between any one of those. So you could build a 6-foot box, then hit SI and see what the exact measurement is in meters or inches. The difference between SI and metric is the lack of centimeters. So there's SI and there's metric. So SI doesn't have centimeters. And for me, I've used Lightwave this way for 20 years, so I will continue to use it that way because it just makes sense to me. But feel free to change it for your workflow as well. The grids. Now, it's set to 1, for instance. When I press the period key to zoom in, I zoom in 1 grid space at a time. If I set 1.5, I go 1 and then 5, 1 and then 5. And here's 1, 2.5. 5, 1, 2.5, 5, and that's just how far in and that jumps with each time. So we'll keep it at 1, 2, 5. Grid snap, we're going to turn that to none. And what that means is if we're moving these points around, I can free float them very, very nicely. If we set this to standard, you can actually see that they snap a little bit. If we set it to fixed at 1 millimeter, which is not a lot, maybe let's do this at 100 millimeters. You can actually see now it's snapping. Okay, so again, architecture, very precise model, and you might want to use that. For our stuff, we're going to turn that to none because it can get in the way. Lastly, navigation. If we have our 3D mouse plugged in, we can use that and change things around, and which is the dominant axis and so on. But we have no device, so that is not in there. That's it. Okay, next video.